The rain pounded against the windshield as Diana rushed through the hospital parking lot, her 7-year-old son Tyler burning with fever in her arms. She had thrown on the first professional clothes she could find, a navy blazer and crisp white shirt from yesterday's court session. Nothing else mattered except getting her baby the help he needed. Tyler had woken up that morning barely able to breathe. His little chest rose and fell with effort, and his skin felt like fire under her touch. Diana had called their pediatrician, but the office was closed for the weekend. The answering service told her to head straight to the emergency room if she was worried. She burst through the automatic doors of St. Michael's Hospital, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The emergency room was busy for a Saturday morning, filled with the usual mix of weekend injuries and illnesses. Diana approached the reception desk where a young woman with tired eyes looked up from her computer. "Please, I need help," Diana said, adjusting Tyler in her arms. "My son has a high fever and he's having trouble breathing." The receptionist glanced at them briefly and handed Diana a clipboard. "Fill this out and have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." Diana looked down at Tyler, who was barely keeping his eyes open. "How long is shortly?" "He's really sick." "Ma'am, everyone here is sick. That's why it's called an emergency room. Please take a seat." Dr. Richard Stone had been working the emergency room for 15 years. He prided himself on being able to read people quickly. It was a skill that served him well in his line of work. When he glanced up from his patient chart and saw Diana holding Tyler in the waiting area, his mind immediately began making assumptions. He noticed her expensive-looking blazer first. Too nice for someone who probably belonged in this part of town, he thought. The way she sat with perfect posture, checking her phone every few minutes, struck him as entitled. Probably one of those mothers who thought her kid's cold was a medical emergency. Dr. Stone had seen it all before. Parents who demanded immediate attention for minor issues while truly sick patients waited. He made a mental note to let her wait a bit longer. Maybe she'd learned some patience. 2 hours passed. Diana watched as other patients who had arrived after them were called back first. An elderly man with a cut on his hand, a teenager with a sprained ankle, a woman with stomach pain. Each time someone else's name was called, Diana felt her frustration growing. Tyler was getting worse. His breathing was more labored now, and he hadn't opened his eyes in the last hour. Diana approached the desk again. "Excuse me, we've been waiting for over 2 hours. My son is getting sicker. Can someone please see him?" The receptionist looked annoyed. "Like I told you before, everyone gets seen in order of medical priority. The triage nurse evaluated your son when you first arrived, but that was 2 hours ago and he's worse now." Dr. Stone overheard the conversation from nearby. He walked over, his white coat giving him an air of authority that he wore like armor. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking at Diana with barely concealed irritation. "Yes, there's a problem," Diana replied, her voice steady but urgent. "My son has been running a high fever since early this morning. His breathing is getting worse, and we've been waiting for over 2 hours while people who came in after us have been seen first." Dr. Stone looked down at Tyler, noting the child's flushed face and rapid breathing, but his prejudices clouded his medical judgment. All he saw was another demanding parent who thought the world revolved around them. "Ma'am, we see patients based on medical priority, not based on how long they've been waiting. Your son appears to have a common childhood illness. Children run fevers all the time." Diana couldn't believe what she was hearing. Common childhood illness. "He can barely breathe." "Children are resilient. A little fever never hurt anyone." Dr. Stone's tone was dismissive, the kind reserved for patients he considered beneath his time and expertise. What Dr. Stone didn't know was that Diana spent her days in federal court, where her word carried the weight of law. She was used to being heard, respected, and taken seriously. But here, in this hospital, wearing her nice clothes and speaking with confidence, she was being treated like a nuisance. "Doctor, I'm asking you as a medical professional to examine my child properly. Something is seriously wrong." Dr. Stone felt his annoyance spike. Here was another entitled parent who thought they knew better than trained medical professionals. He had dealt with hundreds of cases like this. Parents who read something on the internet and suddenly became medical experts. "Ma'am, I've been practicing medicine for 15 years. I think I can assess the difference between a serious medical emergency and a worried parent overreacting to a simple fever." The waiting room had grown quieter. Other patients and families now watching the exchange. Diana felt the weight of their stares, but her focus remained on Tyler. who seemed to be fading in her arms. I'm not overreacting. Look at him. Really look at him. But Dr. Stone had already made up his mind. He saw an expensive blazer and assumed attitude. He heard confidence in Diana's voice and interpreted it as arrogance. Every word she spoke seemed to confirm his initial judgment about the kind of person she was. I'll have the nurse take his temperature again in another hour. For now, please return to your seat and wait like everyone else. Diana felt something shift inside her chest. Not panic, she was too controlled for that, but a cold, hard anger that she rarely allowed herself to feel. This doctor was letting his assumptions about her override his medical judgment, and it was putting her child at risk. She looked down at Tyler, whose lips were starting to take on a slightly blue tint around the edges. Her maternal instinct screamed that something was seriously wrong, but the person who was supposed to help them had already decided she wasn't worth listening to. Fine, Diana said quietly. We'll wait. But I want it noted in his chart that I specifically requested immediate medical attention for difficulty breathing and was denied by Dr. Stone at 11:15 a.m. The precision of her words and the way she spoke made Dr. Stone pause for just a moment. There was something about her tone that suggested she was used to things being documented, used to accountability, but he pushed the thought away. The chart will reflect that your child was triaged appropriately, he replied curtly before walking away. Diana returned to her seat, holding Tyler closer. She pulled out her phone and began taking notes. Times, names, exact conversations. Years of legal training had taught her to document everything. She had no idea that before this day was over, those notes would become crucial evidence in a case that would shake this hospital to its core. As Tyler's breathing became more labored and his fever climbed higher, Diana realized she was fighting a battle on two fronts, one for her son's health, and another against the dangerous assumptions of a doctor who had already decided she didn't deserve to be heard. 3 hours had passed since Diana first walked through those emergency room doors. Tyler was now completely limp in her arms, his small body burning with fever. His breathing had become so shallow that she had to put her ear close to his chest to make sure he was still breathing. All Diana watched as a man walked in with what appeared to be a minor cut on his finger and was immediately taken to the back. She saw a college student complaining about a hangover get called before them. Her patience, already stretched thin, finally snapped. She stood up, Tyler barely stirring in her arms, and walked directly to the nurse's station. The same tired receptionist looked up with obvious annoyance. Ma'am, I told you to wait in your seat. And I've been waiting for 3 hours while my son gets worse, Diana replied, her voice carrying a new edge of authority. This is unacceptable. I need to speak to someone in charge immediately. Dr. Stone heard the commotion from the nearby examination room where he was treating a patient with a minor rash. That woman again, he thought. Just as he'd suspected, entitled, demanding, and unwilling to follow basic hospital procedures. He excused himself from his patient and walked over to the nurse's station, his expression stern. Ma'am, you need to return to your seat. You're disrupting other patients. Diana looked at him with barely controlled frustration. I'm disrupting other patients? Doctor, my child is seriously ill, and you've been ignoring us for 3 hours while people with minor issues get seen first. This isn't about first come, first served anymore. This is about basic medical care. Your child has a fever. Children get fevers. It's not a medical emergency every time a parent gets worried. The dismissive tone in his voice sparked something fierce in Diana. In her courtroom, when she spoke, people listened. When she made a ruling, it carried the force of law. But here she was being treated like her concerns didn't matter. Doctor, I'm telling you that something is seriously wrong with my son. His breathing is labored. He's been running a high fever for hours and he's barely conscious. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for basic medical care. Dr. Stone crossed his arms, a gesture that made him look more like a bouncer than a doctor. Ma'am, I've examined hundreds of children with fevers. Your son is not in distress, you are. Maybe you should consider that your anxiety is making this situation seem worse than it is. The nurses and other staff had stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation. Diana could feel their eyes on her, She sensed their judgment. She knew how this must look. A well-dressed black woman arguing with a white doctor in front of everyone. My anxiety? Diana's voice remained controlled, but there was steel in it now. Doctor, I'm not an anxious mother.
I'm a mother who knows when something is wrong with her child.
And right now you're more interested in proving you're in charge than in actually practicing medicine. That was the moment Dr. Stone decided she had crossed a line. In his 15 years of practice, he had never had a patient speak to him with such directness. The fact that she was showing no deference to his authority, no appreciation for his expertise, confirmed everything he had initially thought about her. "Security," he called out, his voice carrying across the emergency room. "I need security to the nurses' station." Diana couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Security? Are you serious right now? Ma'am, you're being disruptive and aggressive. You're refusing to follow hospital procedures and you're interfering with patient care." A security guard appeared within minutes, a large man in his 40s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Diana could see the confusion in his eyes as he looked between her, holding a sick child and dressed professionally, and Dr. Stone, who was clearly agitated. "What's the problem here, Doc?" Dr. Stone straightened up, adopting his most authoritative tone. "This woman has been causing problems since she arrived. She's refusing to wait her turn, making unreasonable demands and disrupting other patients. I've asked her multiple times to follow our procedures, but she's being combative." Diana looked at the security guard, then back at Dr. Stone. "I brought my sick child to the emergency room 3 hours ago. He has a high fever and difficulty breathing. Instead of receiving medical care, we've been ignored while less urgent cases were seen first. When I asked for help, I was told to wait. When I asked again, I was dismissed. And now when I'm advocating for my child's health, I'm being called disruptive." The security guard looked uncomfortable. He glanced down at Tyler, who was clearly very sick, then back at Dr. Stone. "Doc, maybe we should just get the kid looked at." Dr. Stone felt his authority being questioned, which only made him more determined to assert control. "I've already assessed the child. He has a common fever. The mother is overreacting and causing problems for other patients." "Overreacting?" Diana's voice carried a dangerous quiet. "My child is burning with fever and can barely breathe, and you think I'm overreacting?" "Ma'am, you need to calm down," the security guard said, though he didn't sound convinced of his own words. "Don't tell me to calm down. Tell the doctor to do his job." Dr. Stone had heard enough. He made a decision that would change everything. "Call the police. I want her escorted from the premises. She's being threatening and disruptive, and I suspect there might be more going on here than just a sick child." The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Diana felt the words hit her like a physical blow. She understood exactly what he was suggesting, that somehow she was using her sick child as cover for something illegal. "You want to call the police? On a mother trying to get medical care for her child?" "I want to call the police on someone who's refusing to follow hospital policy and becoming increasingly aggressive." The waiting room had fallen completely silent now. Everyone was watching the confrontation unfold. Diana could see the mixture of curiosity, judgment, and pity in their faces. She felt the familiar weight of being the only black face in a room full of white people who had already decided what kind of person she must be, but Diana had spent years in courtrooms where she was often the only person who looked like her. She had faced down hostile attorneys, aggressive defendants, and skeptical colleagues. She had never backed down from a fight when justice was on the line, and she wasn't about to start now, especially when her child's life was at stake. "Go ahead," she said quietly. "Call the police. But I want everyone in this waiting room to witness that you called the police on a mother seeking medical care for her sick child. I want them to see that instead of examining my son, you chose to criminalize me for asking you to do your job." Dr. Stone was already dialing. He was convinced that this woman was trouble, that there was something not right about the whole situation. Her expensive clothes, her authoritative way of speaking, her refusal to be intimidated, it all added up to someone who was probably involved in something illegal. As he made the call, requesting police assistance for a disruptive individual at the hospital, Diana held Tyler closer and made her own call to her phone's voice recorder. She began documenting everything: the time, the doctor's name, the exact words that had been said, and the fact that police had been called on her for seeking medical care for her child. What neither Diana nor Dr. Stone knew was that this confrontation was being witnessed by more than just the patients in the waiting room. A nurse at the station had quietly started her own recording, disturbed by what she was seeing unfold. Another patient had started live streaming on social media, captioning it, "Doctor calls cops on mom with sick kid." The wheels of consequences were already in motion. though neither of the main players realized it yet. Dr. Stone thought he was dealing with a problem patient. Diana knew she was fighting for her child's life. Neither of them understood that this moment would soon become a flashpoint that would expose the ugly reality of how bias can turn a medical emergency into a nightmare. As they waited for the police to arrive, Tyler's condition continued to deteriorate in his mother's arms. While a doctor's prejudices prevented him from seeing what should have been obvious to any trained medical professional, that this child was genuinely, dangerously sick. Officer Rodriguez had been a cop for 12 years, and he'd seen everything from domestic disputes to armed robberies. But when he got the call about a disruptive individual at St. Michael's Hospital, he expected to find someone drunk, high, or mentally unstable. What he didn't expect was to walk into the emergency room and see a professionally dressed woman holding a clearly sick child. Diana saw him coming before he reached her. She watched as his eyes scanned the waiting room, looking for the problem he'd been called to handle. When his gaze landed on her, she saw the moment of confusion cross his face. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez. I understand there's been some kind of disturbance?" Diana looked at him calmly, though her heart was racing. Tyler was barely conscious in her arms, his little body radiating heat even through her blazer. "Officer, the only disturbance here is that I brought my very sick child to the emergency room 4 hours ago. And instead of receiving medical care, the doctor called you." Dr. Stone approached quickly, not wanting to lose control of the narrative. "Officer, this woman has been causing problems since she arrived. She's been demanding special treatment, arguing with staff, and refusing to follow hospital procedures. When I tried to explain our policies, she became increasingly hostile." Officer Rodriguez looked between Diana and Dr. Stone, then down at Tyler. Even from a few feet away, he could see the child was seriously ill. The kid's breathing was labored, his skin was flushed with fever, and he wasn't responding to the voices around him. "Doc, the kid looks pretty sick to me. Maybe we should focus on getting him some help. I've already assessed the child. He has a typical childhood fever. The problem is the mother's attitude." Diana felt a surge of anger but kept her voice level. "Officer, my son woke up this morning with a high fever and difficulty breathing. I brought him here immediately. We've been waiting for 4 hours while people who came in after us with minor injuries were seen first. When I asked for help, I was told to wait. When I asked again, I was dismissed. And when I insisted that my child needed immediate attention, the doctor called you instead of examining my son." Officer Rodriguez was starting to understand the real problem here. He'd seen this kind of situation before, though usually not in a hospital. The way Dr. Stone was talking about the woman, the assumptions he seemed to be making, the complete disregard for the obviously sick child, it all felt familiar and uncomfortable. But he also knew his job. He'd been called to respond to a complaint, and he had to follow through even if he didn't like the situation. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification." The words hit Diana like a slap. Here she was, holding her desperately sick child, and she was being asked to prove who she had a right to be. But years of experience had taught her that arguing with police officers, especially in public, was a dangerous game, particularly for someone who looked like her. She shifted Tyler to one arm and reached into her purse, pulling out her driver's license with steady hands. Officer Rodriguez took it and looked it over carefully. "Diana Williams," he read aloud. "Local address. Ma'am, do you have insurance information for your son's medical care?" The question felt like another insult. "Yes, I have insurance. I have excellent insurance. That's not the issue here." Diana produced her insurance cards, her hands shaking slightly with exhaustion and frustration. Tyler hadn't moved or made a sound in over an hour, and she was terrified that something was seriously wrong. Dr. Stone watched the interaction with satisfaction. This was exactly what he'd expected. Probably no insurance, maybe a fake ID, definitely someone trying to get free medical care they weren't entitled to. But as Officer Rodriguez looked over Diana's identification and insurance information, he noticed something that made him pause. The address was in one of the nicest neighborhoods in the city. The insurance was premium coverage through the Federal Employee Health Plan. And there was something about the name Diana Williams that seemed familiar. "Ma'am, what do you do for work?" Diana hesitated. In her experience, mentioning her job often changed how people treated her, sometimes for the better, sometimes making them more resentful. But Tyler was getting worse by the minute, and she was running out of options. I work for the federal government, she said simply. What kind of federal work? I'm a judge. Federal District Court. The waiting room went dead silent. Officer Rodriguez looked at the ID again, then back at Diana. Dr. Stone felt something cold settle in his stomach. You're Judge Diana Williams? Officer Rodriguez asked, his tone completely different now. Yes. Officer Rodriguez had heard of Judge Williams. She was known in law enforcement circles as fair but tough. Someone who took the law seriously but treated everyone with respect. She'd presided over several high-profile cases and her reputation was spotless. He looked at Dr. Stone, then back at Diana holding her sick child. The whole situation suddenly felt very different and very wrong. Doctor, this is a federal judge holding her sick child. What exactly did you call me here for? Dr. Stone felt the ground shifting under his feet. A federal judge? That was impossible. Federal judges didn't bring their kids to emergency rooms and cause scenes. They had private doctors, private hospitals. They didn't argue with medical staff or make demands. She was being disruptive, argumentative, refusing to follow procedures. What procedures? Getting medical care for her child? The watching crowd in the emergency room was transfixed. Cell phones had appeared, some people were recording, and everyone was whispering to each other. This was better than any reality TV show. Diana could feel the weight of all those eyes on her. She was a federal judge being questioned by police while holding her desperately sick child. Tomorrow, this would probably be all over social media, but right now all she cared about was Tyler. Officer, I understand you have a job to do. I've provided my identification, my insurance information, and answered your questions. Now I'm asking you, as a mother and as someone who has spent her career in the justice system, to help me get medical care for my child. Officer Rodriguez looked at Tyler, who was now completely unresponsive. The child's lips had a blue tint and his breathing was so shallow it was barely visible. Doc, this kid needs to be seen right now. Look at him. Dr. Stone was trapped. He couldn't admit that his medical judgment had been clouded by his prejudices. He couldn't acknowledge that he'd let a child suffer because he'd made assumptions about the mother. And he certainly couldn't explain why he'd called the police on a federal judge seeking medical care. I'll have a nurse take his vitals again, he said weakly. No, Diana said firmly. Not a nurse, you. You examine my child right now or I want another doctor. This has gone on long enough. The authority in her voice was unmistakable now. This wasn't just a worried mother anymore. This was a federal judge who was used to being obeyed, and she was done playing games with her child's life. Officer Rodriguez stepped back slightly. He'd done his job. He'd responded to the call, checked IDs, assessed the situation, and what he'd found was a respected federal judge trying to get medical care for her genuinely sick child, while being treated with inexplicable hostility by the medical staff. Doctor, I think you need to examine this child immediately. I don't see any disturbance here except for the delay in medical care. Dr. Stone realized that his world was about to come crashing down. The woman he'd dismissed as a problem patient, the mother he'd accused of overreacting, the person he'd called the police on, was one of the most powerful judicial figures in the region. But more than that, looking at Tyler now with clear eyes instead of prejudiced ones, he could see what he should have seen hours ago. This child was in serious medical distress. His breathing was labored, his fever was dangerously high, and he was barely responsive. Dr. Stone had let his biases override his medical training, and now a child's life hung in the balance, while a federal judge, and half the emergency room with their cell phones, watched him realize the magnitude of his mistake. Let's get him into examination room 3 right now, he said, finally accepting what should have been obvious from the moment Diana walked through the door. As they moved toward the examination room, Diana caught Officer Rodriguez's arm gently. Thank you for treating me with respect. I know you were just doing your job. He nodded, feeling uncomfortable about the whole situation. As he watched the federal judge carry her sick child toward the examination room, he wondered how many other people had been treated poorly in this hospital, simply because of how they looked or what assumptions the staff had made about them. The damage was done, though. Diana Williams, federal judge, respected jurist, and most importantly, loving mother, had been humiliated in front of a room full of strangers while her child suffered. And everyone had seen it happen. The examination room felt cramped as Diana laid Tyler on the small bed. His little body looked so fragile against the white sheets. And for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her fear. Dr. Stone was finally examining her son, but she could see the panic beginning to creep into his movements. Tyler's temperature registered 104.2 degrees. His oxygen saturation was dangerously low. His heart rate was racing while his blood pressure was dropping. Even Dr. Stone, clouded as his judgment had been, couldn't ignore these vital signs. "We need to get some fluids started immediately," he called to the nurse. "And I want a chest x-ray right now." Diana watched as the medical team suddenly sprang into action with the urgency that should have been present 4 hours earlier. Nurses rushed in with IV equipment. Portable monitors were wheeled in, and Tyler was surrounded by the kind of medical attention she'd been begging for all morning. "What's wrong with him?" Diana asked, though she could see the answer in Dr. Stone's increasingly worried expression. "His symptoms suggest a serious respiratory infection, possibly pneumonia. We need to run some tests to confirm, but his condition is—" Dr. Stone paused, realizing how his next words would sound after hours of dismissing this exact concern. "His condition is serious." As if to emphasize the point, Tyler's breathing became even more labored. The oxygen monitor began beeping more rapidly, and his lips took on a darker blue tint. "We need to get him to the ICU," Dr. Stone announced. "Now." The next few minutes blurred together in a rush of medical terminology and urgent procedures. Tyler was intubated to help him breathe. IV lines were established and antibiotics were started. Diana found herself pushed to the side as the medical team fought to stabilize her son. She stood against the wall, still wearing her navy blazer that now seemed ridiculous in this medical crisis, watching strangers work to save Tyler's life. This was the emergency she'd been trying to tell them about for hours. Nurse Jennifer Hayes had been working at St. Michael's for 8 years, and she'd seen Dr. Stone in action many times. She'd always considered him competent, if sometimes difficult to work with. But today, something about the whole situation bothered her. She'd watched the confrontation in the waiting room. She'd seen how Dr. Stone had treated the woman and her obviously sick child. And when she heard someone mention that the mother was a federal judge, pieces began clicking together in her mind. As Tyler was being transferred to the ICU, Jennifer pulled out her phone and did a quick search. Federal Judge Diana Williams brought up dozens of results. News articles about her recent appointment to the federal bench. Photos of her at various legal ceremonies. A profile piece calling her one of the most promising judicial minds of her generation. Jennifer looked at the woman standing helplessly beside her son's ICU bed, then back at her phone screen. This was the same person Dr. Stone had called disruptive and demanding, the same mother he'd dismissed as overreacting to a simple fever. Word was already spreading through the hospital. Nurses whispered to each other as they passed in hallways. Orderlies shared the story as they went about their duties. The security guard who'd witnessed the police being called was telling everyone who would listen about what he'd seen. "Did you hear what happened in the ER? Dr. Stone called the cops on a federal judge? The woman with the sick kid, she's Judge Williams. You know, the one who was just in the news for that big corruption case." Hospital Administrator Rebecca Chen received the call at home during her daughter's soccer game. The voice on the other end was frantic. One of the senior nurses calling to report a situation that needed immediate attention. "What kind of situation?" Rebecca asked, stepping away from the soccer field. "Dr. Stone called the police on a patient. The patient was a federal judge trying to get medical care for her critically ill child." Rebecca felt her stomach drop. In her 10 years as administrator, she'd dealt with medical malpractice suits, staff conflicts, and budget crises. But she'd never dealt with anything like this. "Is the child okay?" "He's in the ICU. Severe pneumonia and sepsis. He could have died if we'd waited much longer." Rebecca closed her eyes and tried to process what she was hearing. A fede. Rail judge's child nearly died while staff ignored the mother's pleas for help, and instead of providing medical care, they'd called the police on her. "I'm coming in right now. Get me a full report of everything that happened. And I want security footage from the ER. Don't let anyone else talk to the media until I get there." As Rebecca rushed toward her car, her phone was already buzzing with notifications. Someone had posted video of the confrontation on social media. The hashtag Dasher's Justice for Judge Williams was starting to trend locally. Back in the ICU, Diana sat beside Tyler's bed, holding his small hand while machines monitored his vital signs. The doctors had confirmed her worst fears. Tyler had developed severe pneumonia that had progressed to sepsis. If they'd waited much longer to treat him, He could have gone into septic shock. Dr. Stone appeared in the doorway looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. He approached Diana's chair hesitantly. "Mrs. Judge Williams, I wanted to give you an update on Tyler's condition." Diana looked up at him with eyes that held no anger, just exhaustion and worry. "How is he?" "The antibiotics are starting to work. His oxygen levels are improving and his fever is coming down. We caught it in time." The phrase "in time" hung between them like an accusation. They both knew how much earlier it could have been caught if proper medical care had been provided when Diana first arrived. "Judge Williams, I owe you an apology. I made some serious errors in judgment today, and I want you to know that I take full responsibility." Diana was quiet for a long moment, watching Tyler's chest rise and fall with the assistance of the ventilator. "Dr. Stone, do you know what I do for a living, besides being a judge?" He shook his head. "Before I was appointed to the federal bench, I prosecuted civil rights cases. I spent years fighting against exactly the kind of treatment you subjected me to." Today, Dr. Stone felt his face flush with shame. "I've seen what happens when people in positions of power let their assumptions override their professional responsibilities. I've seen how bias can literally be a matter of life and death." She turned to look at him directly. "My son could have died today because you decided I wasn't worth listening to. Not because of anything medical, but because you looked at me and decided what kind of person I must be." "Judge Williams, I'm not finished." Her voice carried the quiet authority of the courtroom. "The question now is what we do about it. Because this isn't just about me and Tyler, this is about every other parent who comes through those doors and doesn't get proper care because of who they are or how they look." Dr. Stone realized that his career was probably over, but more importantly, he was beginning to understand the full weight of what his prejudices had almost cost. Meanwhile, Rebecca Chen was dealing with a crisis that was spiraling beyond the hospital walls. The video from the emergency room had been shared hundreds of times. Local news stations were picking up the story. Her phone was ringing nonstop with reporters asking for comment about why St. Michael's Hospital had called police on a federal judge seeking medical care for her child. The hospital's reputation was about to be destroyed. Tyler Williams had nearly died, and a federal judge had been humiliated, all because one doctor couldn't see past his own biases to provide basic medical care. As Tyler's vital signs continued to improve throughout the night, Diana realized that this experience had changed something fundamental in her understanding of how the world worked. She'd always known that bias existed, had fought against it professionally for years, but experiencing it personally, especially while her child's life hung in the balance, had shown her just how deep and dangerous those prejudices could be. Tomorrow, when Tyler was stable, she would have decisions to make about how to respond. But tonight she just held her son's hand and was grateful he was still breathing. Tyler opened his eyes on Sunday morning, and Diana felt a relief so profound it brought tears she'd been holding back for 24 hours. The ventilator had been removed during the night and his fever had finally broken. Her little boy was going to be okay. But outside Tyler's ICU room, a storm was brewing that would reshape everything about how St. Michael's Hospital operated. The video from the emergency room had gone viral overnight. Her justice for Judge Williams was trending nationally, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of bias in healthcare settings. News vans had gathered in the hospital parking lot, and reporters were calling it a shocking example of systemic discrimination in American healthcare. Rebecca Chen had been at the hospital since 4 a.m., trying to manage a crisis that seemed to grow worse by the hour. The hospital's board of directors had called an emergency meeting. The state medical board had opened an investigation, and most damaging of all, patients were already transferring to other hospitals, afraid they might receive similar treatment. Dr. Stone sat in his office, staring at a letter of resignation he'd written 3 times but couldn't bring himself to submit. His medical career was effectively over, he knew that. But more than his career, he was struggling with the realization of who he'd become without even noticing it. He'd always thought of himself as a good doctor, someone who cared about helping people. But looking back at yesterday's events with clear eyes, he couldn't deny what had really happened. He'd looked at Diana Williams and made assumptions based on nothing but her appearance and his own prejudices. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Rebecca Chen entered, followed by the hospital's legal counsel. "Dr. Stone, we need to discuss what happened yesterday." I know. I've already written my resignation. Rebecca sat down across from him. Richard, resignation might not be enough. The hospital is facing potential lawsuits, federal investigations, and a public relations nightmare that could take years to recover from. We need to understand exactly what happened and why. Dr. Stone looked out his window at the news vans in the parking lot. What happened is that I let my biases nearly kill a child. I saw a black woman in expensive clothes and decided she must be trouble. I ignored clear medical symptoms because I'd already decided she was the kind of patient who demanded special treatment she didn't deserve. The legal counsel leaned forward. Dr. Stone, I need to advise you that anything you say could be used in future legal proceedings. Good, Dr. Stone replied. Maybe it should be. Maybe what I did was so wrong that there should be legal consequences. Meanwhile, Diana was fielding phone calls from reporters, civil rights organizations, and legal experts who wanted to help her pursue action against the hospital. But her focus remained on Tyler, who was improving hourly and asking for his favorite cartoon on the ICU television. Her phone buzzed with a text from her law clerk. The story is everywhere. CNN wants an interview. What should I tell them? Diana looked at Tyler, who was finally eating some crackers and looking more like himself. She'd built her career fighting injustice, but now she was at the center of a case that could set important precedents for healthcare equality. That afternoon, Hospital Administrator Rebecca Chen requested a meeting with Diana. They sat in a small conference room while Tyler napped, monitored by nurses who now treated Diana with the utmost respect. Judge Williams, I want to personally apologize for what happened to you and your son. There's no excuse for the treatment you received. Diana studied Rebecca's face, looking for sincerity. Ms. Chen, apologies are important, but they don't change systems. What are you going to do to make sure this never happens to another family? We're implementing immediate changes. All staff will undergo mandatory bias training. We're revising our emergency room protocols to ensure medical needs take priority over administrative procedures. And we're creating an oversight committee that includes community representatives. And Dr. Stone, he submitted his resignation, though that decision is ultimately up to the medical board's investigation. Diana was quiet for a moment. Ms. Chen, I don't want Dr. Stone's career destroyed out of revenge. I want him to understand what he did wrong and help prevent it from happening again. Sometimes the most powerful testimony comes from someone who's made mistakes and learned from them. Rebecca was surprised by the response. Most people in Diana's situation would be demanding maximum punishment. Judge Williams, are you saying you don't want to pursue legal action? I'm saying I want to pursue the kind of action that creates real change. If that includes legal proceedings, so be it. But my goal isn't punishment, it's prevention. Over the following weeks, Diana made a decision that surprised many people. Instead of pursuing a large financial settlement, she worked with the hospital to create the Tyler Williams Patient Advocacy Program, named after her son, who had fully recovered and returned to his second-grade class. The program required all medical staff to undergo quarterly training on implicit bias and patient advocacy. It established clear protocols for emergency medical situations that prioritized medical need over administrative procedures. Most importantly, it created a patient advocate position, someone whose only job was to ensure patients received appropriate care, regardless of their background. Dr. Stone, rather than simply disappearing in disgrace, became an unlikely ally in the reform effort. He spoke at medical conferences about how bias had clouded his judgment and nearly cost a child his life. His presentations were uncomfortable but powerful, forcing other medical professionals to examine their own assumptions. I thought I was a good doctor, he would tell audiences. I thought I treated all patients equally. But when I was forced to confront the truth about my actions, I realized I'd been practicing medicine through a lens of prejudice I didn't even know I had. The story of Diana Williams and Tyler became a case study in medical schools across the country. It was used to train emergency room staff on recognizing and overcoming bias. Most importantly, it sparked conversations in hospitals everywhere about how assumptions and prejudices could literally be matters of life and death. 6 months later, Diana received a letter from a mother in Chicago whose daughter had received immediate treatment for similar symptoms at her local hospital. The staff had mentioned the Diana Williams protocols that ensured children with respiratory distress received immediate attention regardless of who their parents were. Your story saved my daughter's life, The letter read, "The doctor said they might have made her wait, but because of what happened to your family, they knew to take her symptoms seriously right away." Tyler, now fully recovered and back to his energetic 7-year-old self, didn't fully understand why his scary day at the hospital had led to his picture being in newspapers. But he did understand that his mom had used their difficult experience to help other kids who might get sick. Dr. Stone eventually found work at a community health clinic, where he practiced medicine with a humility and awareness he'd never had before. He kept Diana's business card in his pocket as a reminder of the day he learned that being a good doctor meant more than just medical knowledge. It meant seeing each patient as a human being deserving of respect and care. The changes at St. Michael's Hospital spread to other healthcare systems as administrators realized they couldn't afford the legal, financial, and reputational costs of biased treatment. What had started as one doctor's prejudice against one mother had become a catalyst for systemic change in healthcare delivery. Diana often reflected on how her worst day as a mother had become one of her most important contributions as a judge and advocate. She'd always fought for justice in courtrooms, but now she'd helped create justice in hospital emergency rooms across the country. And every night when she tucked Tyler into bed, she was reminded that sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones we choose to fight, but the ones that choose us. The fight for her son's life had become a fight for every child whose parents might someday need to advocate for proper medical care. Tyler was healthy. The hospital had changed, and other families would receive better care because of what they'd endured. Justice, Diana had learned, sometimes came in forms you never expected.